John 7:20. Quid me quaeritis interficere? Respondit turba et dixit, Demonium habes. Quis te quaerit interficere? Why are you seeking to kill me? The crowd answered and said, You have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? As you'll be able to see right away, the syntax of this verse is relatively simple, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about how to construe Latin syntax when you have no helpful aids like the punctuation that you would find in a modern edition. Of course, the ancient texts, as they are known to us, not just this text, but many others, whether they came in the form of scrolls or later on in late antiquity in the form of codexes, something more like what we think of in modern times as a book. Generally, punctuation, if there was any, was inconsistent and not altogether very helpful. Oftentimes, even modern editions, some modern editions of ancient texts will forego punctuation for that reason. For instance, the most recent edition of the Deutsche Bibelgesellschaft Stuttgart Biblia Sacra Vulgata, the standard edition of the Vulgate. So when you're reading it, you have to figure it out as you go. You have to sort of mentally put punctuation in, or you have to more or less grow beyond the need for punctuation altogether. So in the case of this sentence, it helps us to recognize units of thought that are complete or relatively complete in and of themselves. We might locate the first here. Quid me quaeritis interficere? Why are you all, we need to notice in passing here, this is a second person plural, present active indicative ending from quaero, quaerere. Why are you all seeking to kill me? It would help us to notice right off the bat that very often, not always of course, but very often when a sentence begins with quid, we're going to be looking at a question at the end. Quid, why? Sometimes also, of course, what, depending on context. But here, why? Why, cur, quam abrem, quade causa? Why are you seeking to kill me, to put me to death? Now we can see a new sentence begins with this new verb, respondit, which we're going to know, despite a little bit of morphological ambiguity, is third person perfect active indicative based on its correspondence to the very next verb, dixit. Respondit turba, the crowd collectively answered and said. And of course, we're used to seeing a verb of saying followed by direct speech in the Vulgate. There's actually a lot of direct speech in the Vulgate. And in one sense, that's rather nice, in part because sometimes Latin students find indirect speech more challenging to construe, but also, of course, it aids the sense of immediacy and vividness of the narrative. The gospel authors, all of them, all four evangelists, use direct quotation extensively, in part because they were there and witnessed the events that they're describing. So, respondit turba dixit, and the crowd collectively said, Demonium habes. Now here, if we were going to get really modern and fancy, we'd probably put an exclamation mark, because this isn't the sort of thing that you say to someone unless you mean it in kind of an exclamatory sense, right? This is a serious charge to level at a man who ostensibly considers himself a pious Israelite, a pious Jewish man who respects the law, whom people are calling teacher, rabbi, and that sort of thing. To say Demonium habes is quite a big deal. So you're going to want an exclamation mark there. Here, the only thing probably worth remarking on is that Demonium is a neuter noun of the second declension. In origin, it is a diminutive of Greek daimon, spirit, not necessarily an evil spirit, but a divine being of various types. Daimon was used pretty variously in antiquity, but eventually went into Latin more or less directly as daimon, and then eventually daimonium. You have a demon, you have a spirit, and here contextually we can tell they mean not just any spirit. They're not just saying like, hey, you have a soul. They mean you have an evil spirit. You have an evil spirit inside you. You are possessed, in other words. And their grounds for saying this are a certain incredulousness about his claim, or perhaps pretended incredulousness. It's not totally clear right away whether or not everyone in this crowd knows that there are, in fact, people trying to kill Jesus, plotting his death, even as this is happening. So whether or not some of them are being disingenuous or are reacting with genuine puzzlement to what he's saying doesn't really matter for our purposes. Here is the next question. And just as with the first one, our clue for punctuating it this way is another question word at the leading end of a sentence. Quis, who? Who is seeking, and they pick up the same word that Jesus had used here, this time in the third person singular, present active indicative. Who is seeking to kill you? And notice the word order is the same here. Question word, interrogative, accusative object, direct object, verb, finite verb, and then infinitive.